Protests in the Republic of Kenya, led by the Azimio la Umoja leader, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, has now gone into week 2. So we are here to evaluate what does this mean for the East African Federation and the impacts therein. We know that the Deputy President, His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, said that, Kenya has already lost 2 billion Kenyan shillings just last week because of the demonstrations. So, but also we know that Kenya has portrayed itself in the region as a modern or growing or mushrooming democracy that has, inspired many other countries in the region. So when things like this begin to happen, we then have to take a seat and evaluate what does this imply for the region at large. But also we know that, the USA-Africa summit continue to happen. And we know that the Vice President, Her Excellency Kamala Harris, is set to visit so many African countries. So we shall evaluate what does this mean moving forward. And to put this all in perspective is a panel of immaculate senior citizens of this country. That is now my honor and pleasure to introduce to you our viewers. From the extreme left is Edgar Tabaro. Edgar is a lawyer, but also we know that he does special work for the Republic of Uganda in Sudan. Edgar, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. A pleasure being here. I must emphasize that Khartoum, not Juba.
Okay.
Always make that distinction for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But you talked of Kenya being a scion of democracy.
At least in the contemporary
There is
sense.
a story emerging out of Dodoma, Dar es Salaam. I would like our viewers and fans of this page to pay close attention to President Suluhu. She's doing amazing things, and we are not publicizing it. We should get time and discuss Tanzania.
Yeah.
She's reversed many of the draconian policies. And laws of Pombe Magufuli.
Yeah.
She has reached out to the opposition. Leaders, African politicians are politicians after all, but I think thus far, I'm really proud of her.
And isn't the Vice President of the USA set to visit Tanzania?
Yes. She's been very deliberate in the countries she's visiting. And she's also been very deliberate in the countries she's not visiting.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you very much, Edgar. Next to Edgar is Mr. Sserubiri Uhuru, and he's a Pan-African. Sserubiri is the first time on this show. Ndugu, habari.
Thank you. Good evening. It's my pleasure to be here. I think the tag Pan-African, I wouldn't prefer it. I think an African, and I think it's enough.
Yeah.
Afrocentric.
No, you see, if you're an African, definitely you're supposed to be Afrocentric. You cannot say I'm an African. So if you're not Afrocentric, then you are what?
There are Africans who work against African interests.
That's a difference.
That happens. That's happy, but you are expected to be Afrocentric. If you're an African, that's what is expected from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uhuru. And next to Uhuru is the only lady on the show, Agnes Kirabo, the Executive Director of Food Rights Alliance. Edie, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Happy to be back here. Greetings to everyone, and especially those who I doubt they're there, that are in control of their lives and what is happening around them. But nevertheless, we thank God that we do still live, and the fact that we are living an extra day, then the task is before us. To cause change for the better, we need to be given a very good reference when we part this world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Edgar, let me just begin with you. It's now the second week of the demonstrations. Raila seems to be hell-bent regarding mobilizing his supporters to really frustrate and make Kenya ungovernable for the Kenya Kwanza government.
Is that his desired? That's
the implication. No, I mean, that is the implication.
That's the variable destiny that, of the chosen path.
Because if the government has to spend its time and resources running after its own citizens, then it isn't governing the country. But anyway, your own perspective. I don't know, how do you evaluate the implications so far?
I have followed Raila for some time. I must say he's an enigma. I started following him when I was 13 years in 1990. I was completing my primary 7 in Makasero Primary School. and there was this newspaper, the Kenya Times, which was a mouthpiece of KANU, edited by a veteran journalist called Philip Ocheng. Later became a columnist in the Sunday Nation, and also used to author some pieces in the East African. So they profiled Raila at that time, and I followed him. I followed him when they were forming the Forum for Return of Democracy with Ken Matiba, Martin Shikuku, Kijana wa Malwa, Mwai Kibaki, his own father Oginga Odinga, all those luminaries that were involved in that formation. As it were, Raila did contribute to its split into Ford Kenya and Ford Asili, and as a result of that split, they lost that election to Moi. Moi won the election with a minority. I know that time they didn't need the 50 plus. Any minority, with 4 provinces under your armpit, and you have it. In 1997, again, split for the Asili further. For Asili further, he formed the National Democratic Party, NDP, failing Mwai Kibaki of DP. Who are the other front runners? So in 2000, come to between 97 and 2001, starts with a loose, we called it a cohabitation, then later an alliance when he joined the KANU government as cabinet minister for energy, notoriously sharing the same docket with Chris Okemo. They were both ministers for energy. Under Moi, had a bloated cabinet. You'd have 2 ministers serving in the same docket. not ministers of state, 2 cabinet ministers.
Interesting.
So I wonder whether was one to handle incoming and another outgoing correspondence. but that was the system. So after the alliance, they did the merger with KANU. He became Secretary General. As it's well known, at Kasarani, he caused the split of KANU when they endorsed Uhuru Kenyatta to be the presidential candidate. He backs, you remember Kibaki Tosha?
Yes.
For the presidency under NAC, National
Rainbow Coalition.
Coalition. He joins it, he also splits it. He also splits it from
So
ODM.
he's a rubber rose.
Yeah, he's a rubber roser. That has been his style. I remember way back in 1982, he had been the ringleader of the coup attempt against President Moi. That was August the 2nd, 1982. Junior Air Force officers from the Lower Nyanza were behind it, and he was an academic he was teaching at the University of Nairobi, teaching engineering. So what was it? Mechanical what? Something like that. The young men were executed. They were tried and executed by military court. Raila survived but kept some 8.5 years of his life under solitary confinement. We thought that would have checked him, but he came even more energized and recharged than he was before. So come 2007, 2008, you saw what happened, post-election violence. The handshake, he was organizing something similar. So it's very typical of Raila. Now, I do political risk analysis for entities out of North America and Europe, EU, and the British Isles. When we're doing political analysis for countries like these, and Kenya is what we would style as a fledgling democracy, nascent. Yes, they are democratizing, they are deepening democracy. They have a more pronounced and more robust civil society than the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, but it's nascent. In other words, it's not mature. The maturity of the democracies there is tested in instances like this. So you have a court ruling that decided on matters that were put before that court, and one of the matters being the physical interaction between the physical and the servers. And that matter was determined that no evidence was adduced to adulterate the final outcome of the election. Now, Raila is choosing on the same thing and taking it to the public. You shall recall, I think on this show or another show, I did say.
Actually, Martha Koome described that court was sent on a fishing expedition.
A fishing expedition to another. They threw, and you see that's the reason politicians go to court really for court to pronounce themselves. They do it as to save face. To save face. I've seen it even here in Uganda when politicians are caught pants down, literally and actually. They threaten to sue for defamation, take out paid adverts, and never comes to pass. So in the case of Kenya, where you have a factitious society, factitious political class, political elite, which is mainly grounded in ethnicity, when an election like that was, first of all, very close to call, secondly, everything, each and everything seemed to be in favor of Raila winning that election. The opinion polls and the so-called deep state. So and they dropped the ball at the last moment. They didn't have election monitors, what are they called? Polling agents, in a substantial number of polling stations. These were more like incumbents, and they did. So they rested on their laurels. They became complacent. And Ruto went to work and beat them. Not decisively, but beat them. Now, the difference between Raila and Raila and Ruto's vote was less than 1,000 votes. Less than 1,000, 233?
Yeah,
233. So, in a vote like that is evenly divided, the statements of the persons, of the protagonists, have to be weighed. Thus far, all the persons speaking are speaking carelessly. They are speaking like street urchins. They don't realize that they are leading the Republic of Kenya. This is the Republic of Kenya, for God's sake. It's not Rwanda, it's not South Sudan. This is the anchor of economies in East Africa. It's the headquarters, regional headquarters of international finance capital, industry and banking executives, cross ownership, cross directorship in those companies, headquarters, sit in Nairobi. So any action of protagonists is taken seriously and has wider ramifications than a county governor. So the leadership there has let us down. Ringathi is speaking like he's a DO, district officer of Kakamega, of Laikipia, when he was employed in 1991. Mind you, Ruto and Ringathi Gachagua were behind election violence in 1991-1992. They are masters of political violence. And on the other side, we also have crafty people, crafty politicians, who are also masters in instigating political violence. So unless we are not Kenyans, but unless persons in like the space that we are in, come out to hold these leaders accountable, get them to see sense in governing Kenya. Governing is not about ruling. It's about deploying the best practices. Best practices. What is wrong with Mr. Ruto, Dr. Ruto, calling Uhuru Kenyatta to State House for a cup of coffee, for a cup of tea? Say, what is the matter? What is the matter? What is it that we need to discuss? Yes, the issues that Raila is presented, rising food prices, and there's even been reneging on the electoral promises by Ruto. He promised to check prices of ugali, their type of food.
But to be fair to Kenya Kwanza, they are only 3 months old into governance.
They came in September?
September, they were sworn in around November. So around 3-4 months into office. Couldn't we be expecting too much? But I want to hear from
No, but
Uhuru.
expecting too much. He's removed subsidies on fuel, on ugali, and which other thing has he?
Fertilizer.
He's removed subsidies, and those are very critical for Kenya's for Kenya's economic stability. Then, besides that, he's gone for the businesses of Uhuru. Brookside controls about 40% of Kenya's dairy.
Mm.
Kenya's dairy industry is about $1.6 billion. So Uhuru alone, he bought Delemaya, he bought Molo milk dairies in Molo dairies in the Rift Valley. He took over he acquired about 6 different companies, and he's not just a significant market player. He's actually a monopolist, given that there are about 8 other players in the market, but alone Brookside controls 40% of the what? Then you have gas, the liquefied purified gas, LPG. East Africa Spectre of Raila Odinga is the biggest importer. It controls about 80% of that market. Now, Ruto licensed a Tanzanian company, Taifa Gas, to come and basically poke into the market of Raila. And believe me, your typical African elite, when you touch their economic base, there's bound to be clawback. And that's what we are witnessing in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Council. I want to hear from Uhuru. Uhuru, even as Raila insists that they shall continue with the demonstrations every Monday and every Thursday, is that let's evaluate the legitimacy of these demonstrations. And if I'm to attempt to put this aspect against what Martin Luther King described, because Martin Luther King was one of the most successful organizers of civil rights demonstrations in the USA. And he said that, for a legitimate demonstration to occur, you must meet certain standards, certain criteria. That one, have you tried to engage the government through several approaches and have failed to take heed of your concerns? 2 is that, is there an aspect of injustice being perpetrated? And many others. So is the Raila Odinga cause a legitimate one? That the rising food prices, which is not only being experienced in Kenya, but also other countries as well, and the factors that could be beyond their control. So I don't know, are these demonstrations legitimate? Are they, founded on genuine principles?
I think will first comment on the issue of democracy, with Kenya being a beacon of democracy in Africa.
In the region.
In the region. I think if we are, the challenge we have, especially with our elite when they're analyzing democracy, is they analyze African democracy outside as though it's an isolated case. And so if we look at democracy as a human experiment, where man is pursuing an ideal system that can be used to govern human affairs. If we look at it as an experiment, I think there are many countries in Africa that actually are doing well in that context. And what do I mean? Because you see, sometimes we treat Africans as though we are robots, that someone comes up and brings maybe a script, and we are supposed to read through it and then adopt it and immediately start implementing it. And then there are all these key performance indicators, and then where someone is checking that, are they doing this, have they established this, and then they come up with a conclusion, whether this is a stable democracy or not. But then we forget the historical context under which democracy evolved. If we look at the Western world, they spent, for them to perfect what they call democracy in their context, it took them over 500 years, if not more. And within those 500 years, they fought major wars. Some were 100 years wars, 50 years wars. It was a strong struggle. So one time I met a colleague of a friend of mine. He was a German, and he was like, so he was talking about democracy. So I was like, okay, you guys have been experimenting on democracy for over 400 years. And I was like, no, our system, we started that after the Second World War, after Hitler. And I was like, no, you didn't start the struggle for democracy after Hitler. Because I'm sure Kant did not write his works after Hitler. He was writing in the 18th century, and he was writing about democracy, he was writing about rights, freedoms. And so you see that these ideas were emerged organically in the Western Hemisphere. And even those ideas to be adopted, and they become standards for governing society, it took hundreds of years. And not just years, but even struggles, wars. And so you look at Africa, we get independence, we are given a script, Even how did we even get here? You are looking at a country like Uganda, you get like over 50 ethnicities, you join them together that you are supposed to live together, coexist, and build a governance system. And then you expect them in 60 years to have perfected it. Now, the ethnic groups you look at in Africa, say Buganda, in Europe, we are talking about Denmark, that's an ethnic group. We are talking about the Swedish, that's an ethnic group. These guys failed to coexist. They fought wars, one against the other, until when they reached a point at the Westphalian Treaty, and they're like, okay, I think we cannot coexist, let us form nation states. And so they formed the nation states as homogeneous cultures. So you're having the nation of Denmark. That's an ethnic group that formed the nation state. Now here, you're talking about Uganda, you're talking about Angola, you're talking about all these ethnicities at different stages of development, and you're telling them you have to coexist together.
Different stages of development?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe social organization.
Social organization.
But and development, basically primordial. Primordial, nothing to talk about.
Yeah, but it's still the stages we are not the same.
We can't even add value extracting cream from milk.
But we are making spears.
So true,
so all these ethnic groups, you bring them together and say, okay, now create a governance system. Now let me tell you the progress we have made since independence. In 60 years, Europe could not even achieve that in 300 years. Talk about when they, from the Magna Carta, and then when constitutional monarchism started emerging from Europe, how long did that happen? Till when they started building stable liberal democracies. We're talking about over 4 centuries. And then for you, what took you 4 centuries?
800
years. You are judging us in 60 years, and you are using the same key performance indicators that you are using today. And then you are saying Kenya is a democracy, this is not a democracy. Actually, when you analyze all countries in sub-Saharan Africa, we have performed exceedingly well in perfecting these democracies. And so I can say all countries of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, when it comes to democracy as a human experiment, we have performed extremely better than Europe could ever do in 200, 300 years. And so we cannot say Kenya is better than this. We all have different dynamics. And so we have to navigate all those dynamics to see that at the end of the day, we build stable systems. Yes, Kenya has made some success. For example, every system should at least ensure sustainability. There must be a path to continuity. And so it has done that, but we cannot even make a judgment right now because we're talking about what? Chibachi up to now, 20 years, can we make that judgment? I don't think we have enough evidence to be able to make that judgment. Maybe 30 years from now, we can be able to do so. But well, talking about your question on whether Laila's issues are legitimate, of course they are legitimate. I think we are unfair to call them Raila's cause because you see these are Kenyans. Yes, politicians sometimes manipulate existing discomfort, existing circumstances for their own political goals, but these are issues of Kenyans because when I was seeing people demonstrating, I wasn't seeing the Raila family. I was seeing Kenyans who have concerns. So the cause is legitimate. There are Kenyans who have issues. They have the unemployment is there, the high cost of living, and so the cause is legitimate. The question would be, okay, what has led us to that point? It's not entirely Ruto, because as you have said, we're talking about a government that has been in leadership for 3 months. But well, as if for me, if I don't have food to buy ugali, I really don't give a damn whether you have been in power for 3 months. All I want is my condition to be better. Because when my kids are dying, I really don't care whether you have been there for 1 month. I want a solution because I'm going to die. If I don't have a job, you won't tell me that, no, you see, I've been there for 1 month. Give me, well, I don't have a job. I'm not able to pay the bills. And so for me, my anger will be on who is occupying leadership. And again, the state of Kenya did not start 3 months ago. Yes, Ruto is the president, but then the institutions have been there. And so it's up to Ruto to go and demand accountability for the people occupying the different offices. That, okay, if we are not able to buy fertilizers as farmers, then there is an office that is responsible for that. And that entire ministry was not put in place by Ruto. And so it's up to him to give us accountability that this ministry has been in existence for years, and so we don't have money to buy fertilizers. What can we do? The fertilizers are expensive.
Because why I ask Uhuru is that the same Raila did not mobilize Kenyans to demonstrate, even when the same conditions pre-existed during Uhuru.
Maybe there is timing.
You see, so that's why could the timing be motivated by political factors?
We cannot separate that because we are humans and we have interests. And so as humans, we all have interests. Raila's interest may be political, but that does not take away the fact that there are causes, that there are issues that are burning, and Kenyans have issues that must be addressed. And so if Raila did not start this, we cannot say that, okay, why didn't he start them maybe 5 years ago? No, right now there are issues that need to be addressed. And so whoever comes and amplifies our voices as the citizens of Kenya, then we are going to back that person because these causes they touch our core being. And so he may be pursuing political capital, that's possible. He may be capitalizing on an existing situation for his own personal ambitions, that's possible, but that does not take away the fact that there are concerns that must be addressed, that Kenyans are facing. And so whoever occupies leadership, whether for 5 years or 1 month, must listen and address them. And you don't say it's 3 months because these ministries have been in place. So we are simply demanding accountability from the ministries, and since you are the person in charge of that, then give us the accountability and give us a solution.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess that anchors on the social contract theory. I mean, both parties have obligations. Director, 2 weeks now into the Kenyan demonstrations, and now we have begun to see, for example, Uhuru's farm was raided by I don't know who, and things were uprooted. So the implications seem to be gradually increasing. But also, what is your own perspective regarding what is happening in Kenya?
What is happening in Kenya? Thank you so much. I just also wish to start by building on what my two brothers have tried to put across. To a lay person, I must declare to this space that I'm neither a student or of democracy but as a human being, I'm part of that whole mix. And so I believe so many other people that are following us and that are listening to us. I think it has come to a time to ask ourselves, some of these concepts need to be redefined in our own way and in our own context, and understand them. And we have been following a straight jacket, and what my brother said, we know there is that common standard against which every nation and every leader is being measured. But what do the people of Kenya, what do the people of Africa, what do the people of Uganda, appreciate as democracy? What does that whole thing called democracy means to them? And the moment you do not have a common vision, the people and their leaders over this concept, you end up where we are. So for you, you're saying, you see, maybe Laila is riding on the current situations to pursue his political ambitions. I don't also want to agree with that, because if we toe that line, we are actually, it is the narrative that African governments keep pushing forward. Every time people stand up and ask questions, they go behind them to look for a Tabaro or for Uhuru to be responsible for these people to be able to air out their voices and, ask and demand for certain things that they expect from their leader. And for me, I want to invite the people of Africa to look at it from that perspective. Let us forget about Laila. Let us forget about any other person. But listen to these people. One, they are human beings in their own right, okay? And let me tell you, they know the risks of going out there. They know the risks. But if they dare to go there, for me, ideally, it would have been very important for somebody to listen to them than necessarily paying attention to who and searching for who is behind them and who is mobilizing them. People need not to be mobilized. As human beings whose civic consciousness has reached somewhere, I don't need to be told you're hungry. Must I wait for somebody to tell me you're hungry?
No.
No. Must I wait for somebody to tell me that I've not been able to pay my rent? Must I wait for somebody to tell me that I've not been able to take my children to school? Must I wait for somebody to tell me that I've not been able to pay my medical bills? No, I don't need to do that. But you know, the political elites, they take the discussions that way. And our leaders have mastered that art. All the time people stand up to raise a voice, they are going behind them to fold their hands in search of somebody who is mobilizing them. Now, Kenya, of course, from the colonial time, Kenya was a bit lucky. I must say, they were a bit lucky because the colonialists established themselves so much in Kenya.
Was it luck? Can we call that luck?
They could be lucky because if that is the yardstick we are using to measure development, then they were lucky that they established so much in Kenya. I believe if they had established like that in any other country in the region, maybe not, they would have been at another level. It is geographically situated well. You know, at the port of the sea, that a natural favor that we do not have, many of us in the East African region. And I think they have capitalized on that to sneeze and everybody catches a cold in the region. But before I go there, let me tell you, when the people rise up and the issue they are mentioning is that they are hungry, even if they are your children, for us, the women, we know. When the men come back home and they say they are hungry and we cannot provide food, we know what follows next. Even if it is your children, any society that goes hungry, the worst is yet to come. And unfortunately, our leaders in Africa have not understood that what actually the people need or desire in the democracy is not who is seated on the throne. Because otherwise, I would have seen Catholics rioting. Like in the case of Uganda, we have a retired cardinal, not in practice, but the Catholics are not complaining. Why? Because all of the services they need from that institution, they receive them.
In Uganda, Catholics have a notorious history of demonstrating and causing upsets.
But also,
in
but also
the 1880s to 1892.
Let me
Remember the social religious war.
Yes.
DP was a counter. It was a Catholic counter elite to mango predominance of Protestants.
But besides going there, let me drive my point home.
Okay.
Let me drive my point home. That the people that are Wananchi, what they desire from a democracy is not necessarily who is seated on the throne. This struggle for who is seated on the throne is coming out of a conviction that actually we are the have-nots, because the haves are the ones that are seated on the
Not necessarily. For Kenya, I have a difference in opinion.
Yes.
In Kenya, their politics is grounded in ethnicity. Ruto tried to upset it by talking about class.
Yes.
But even the class struggle that was just a tag. It was basically
the
ethnicity.
But this one said it well. That you see, when these white guys came, bundled us all together, you understand? And we are not going to forget ourselves. And it goes back, counsel, to what I was saying. When it is the ethnicity group in the throne, the rest of us think that we are living a life that we are not, because we are not the ones in the throne.
And to drive the point home, to bring it, because we're now talking in the abstract, in terms of Kenya.
Yes.
No, there are only 2 Luo ministers. And in very, very, what would you call them? In Uganda, we like using the word dry ministries. Peripheral, very peripheral.
And you see, Council, it is the issue of resources.
And yes, it's an
control
issue.
of resources.
It's an issue of control of resources, which Kenya tried to address through devolution. There are 47 counties, and the 47 counties are given ample. They're given ample resources to manage or mismanage at that level. Really, in Kenya, you would be taking the wrong direction if you didn't address the issue of ethnicity. And in particular, in this instant case, the laws. The laws have been excluded since 1969, when there was that riot in Kisumu, where President Jomo Kenyatta got out of his convoy and with a loaded gun discharged bullets into the public. People died.
That's an injustice.
People died. And you see, from then, that struggle, actually, that was the basis of the handshake that was spearheaded by Mama Ngina. By Mama Ngina. It was on the basis of that feud lasting half a century. The handshake, the Building Bridges Initiative, was meant to address that. Now, unfortunately, sometimes when we're developing our jurisprudence, when we are deepening our democracy, we tend to neglect certain features that eventually express themselves into fault lines and can escalate to a volcanic eruption. Now, in Nigeria, let me draw parallels with Nigeria. Nigeria has deep-rooted divisions in ethnicity. The Biafran War of secession was grounded in that. They have deep-rooted differences in religion. They have deep-rooted differences between the North and the South. Now, it may not be a rule written in their constitution, but it's an unwritten rule and a gentleman's understanding that power is shared between the North and the South, and even rotation. Only on this occasion it has been upset, but it has been upset after testing the other After testing the other unwritten rules, where you would have a southern becoming president. The deputy president is from the northern Muslim, then vice versa, and they would be transferred between between political powers, the incumbent and then to the opposition, and that has really, because Nigeria is still a very difficult country, but I worked there about 10 or so years ago. I did some work in Nigeria. I was consulting for European Union as an advisor to the Nigerian government, and I was there during elections that time. Believe me, they've come a long way, but they have tested it. And this case, there's been a shift because of the demographics. They have many more young people now who are voting. And remember, the vote turnout was also very low. So the dynamics are changing. But after testing the unwritten
The unwritten rule.
the gentleman's understanding about themselves. Now in Kenya, instead of getting some of the principles that formed the Building Bridges Initiative and implementing them, I see there's nothing that Ruto would miss out if he invited Raila for a cup of tea.
Earlier on, but I wanted to conclude my issue to say, one, the script, like my brother called it, the script of democracy that we are using may not apply because of those underlying dynamics that Council has clearly elaborated. The issue of power and the power struggles amongst ethnic groups, religious groups, regions, North versus South, we have to interrogate behind power. To interrogate behind power, why is it that the Wananchi would rise up along those lines? I have told you that for me, as a social behaviorist, majority of the people, the first thing that is in their desire
Food and
is
shelter.
how do I live today?
Food and shelter.
Today, how do I live
Food, shelter,
today?
and education for
Yes,
children, health
these are the
services.
things of who is, who is the ruling class. You see the case that you've given us about Kenya. It is because that one you cannot talk about. It's because people are saying you killed us. You killed us. And this is how our leaders are using power. And they think that years to come, all of us will be gone and everybody has forgotten, which doesn't actually happen. So for me, these people are not happy. And we have been knowing that Kenya, if you want to rule them for the next day, make ugari available and accessible. At least you will negotiate
It's
the
just
next
like in
day.
the Arab world, wheat.
Yeah, because for them, in Kenya, I have been in Kenya several times, and one time I went with my young sister, and we went to a restaurant. She wanted to eat local food, not fast food. So she went to the typical Ugandan and asked for the menu. And when the waiter came, she started, okay, some rice and ugali, moja. For us here in Uganda, you access food based on the sauce.
Everything.
Based on the sauce.
Yeah.
They say cocoa and whatever so much. If samaki is with whatever so much. So they sell the food according to the sauce. It is not the case in Kenya. In Kenya, to have a meal, you earn it. At least in Uganda, why people are not rising up, it's because I can spend a whole month rotating around the three of you, and none of you is complaining. In Kenya, it cannot happen.
Yeah.
So, concluding on this.
In Uganda, we don't as well have what we call a universal staple food.
Yes.
In Buganda, it's matoke. Now it's spread to Bushenyi, but used to be
because we are still
kalo. In northern Uganda, it's both kalo and ugali.
In Western Nile, it's enyansa and so on. But the issue is...
Then when you come to Chigezi, it's Irish potatoes. So if you have...
Irish.
Yeah, if you... Okay, no, the word Irish is actually colloquial. Let us call it potatoes. The word Irish potato is colloquial. Shouldn't be using it in such formal discussions.
And when we are referring to staples.
So if there's crop failure for matoke as a result of the banana wilt, the people in Chigezi are not bothered. When you have locust invasion in
Iteso and Karamoja,
the persons in Kibimba, they are growing their rice in the paddies. So in Uganda.
But in Kenya, ugari is a must. Ugari is a must because this is the start where the poor start their lives and livelihoods from. So for me, democracy
and food is very close to the heart of Madam Kirabo.
Certainly.
I mean food security.
Even food. So for me, I think I'm still dissecting as to how the populace even close to Uhuru's farm, and
I've read there's although the Kenyan link is off, but it was generated by a team of Daily Nation. The Daily Nation is off link, but I accessed it through Monitor. They're showing former governor. Well, they mentioned the names Kiambu, then two singer who mobilized they are using the word goons. I never knew that mainstream newspapers can use such terms to invade. They gave them power saws, gave them machetes, what we call pangas, to go and invade, and they were driven there to invade the Ruiru Northlands.
Just like the Balaros happen in every community, just in the morning.
In Uganda, the Balaro question is a little bit, it's not what it seems. There's more to it.
That's what I was saying.
We'll discuss it one time. At one time you went to land.
I am still in land. Am I still
land alliance and stuff like that?
Yes, am I still doing land? I do still. So anyway, my dear brother, if you want even the laziest person to rise up, threaten the stomach.
That's true. So let's just shift now to actually evaluating the implications of these
Yes.
demonstrations. And perhaps we could begin with the economic perspective, which is that, you know that, like already ably mentioned, is that Uganda, for example, is a landlocked country. So we rely on most of our imports and exports through Mombasa. But also we know that issues around trade have somehow been altered. So let's just begin to evaluate the economic implication of this demonstration, because Raila seems not to relent. He seems to say he will continue with this, and you know, and if you saw the governor of Nairobi, Johnson Sekaja, he also did express in his letter to the governor of Kisumu that already Nairobi has lost so much from the previous demonstrations and they're not willing to carry on with this. So, Edgar, the economic implications of these demonstrations in the region entirely.
We are yet to assess how it has disrupted supply chain. There's nothing to show that supply chain has been that badly disrupted. But make no mistake, in terms of haulage or logistics, even an hour means so much.
It's big enough.
It's big enough. You know, between Kampala and Mombasa, vehicles are expected to take 5 days. 3 days en route to Kampala, and 2 days trucks, 2 days back. So any extra day is an extra cost. And in terms of efficiency, profitability is affected. So in that regard, I've not come upon significant studies showing the disruption, but believe me, it has knock-on effects, because should it escalate, I know escalation to full-blown, you know, there are categorizations of conflict. Low intensity, medium, then high intensity conflicts, then full-blown war, like we have, say, in the M23 in Eastern DRC, or what is now forgotten. And this is the irony of life. We Africans have to get more serious. And that's what that's why I was saying Kenya is not South Sudan, it's not Rwanda, it's not DRC. It's a much more significant entity.
True. And
the leaders there should take themselves more seriously than they are taking themselves. The haulage, if we're to take the Tanzanian route, it would come to maybe 7 or 8 days, because the route, first of all, yes, there's the rail, there's the sea, the sea, what is that port? Mwanza, Port Bell or Jinja or Entebbe, and there's a very big vessel there, but which would help us move bigger volumes. The rail and the water transport move bigger volumes, more containers than road. But unfortunately, our pairs, the so-called ports, Entebbe and Jinja, cannot handle large volumes. I mean, you compare Jinja, Port Bell to Kisumu, it's just, it's a kindergarten of Kisumu. So even then, we are not really prepared as a country. And remember, Uganda is also a gateway to other countries, Eastern DRC, to Ituri, from Bunia to Beni, Kasindi, Goma, and even by extension, Uvira. Uvira Uvira is just about 15 kilometers from Bujumbura in South DRC. But even some areas in Kenya, northeast Kenya, you can access through Uganda. So we've not yet gotten the implications, but certainly there will be implications of that. But more importantly, there are implications on the money markets. The money markets are extremely sensitive, even to what is the word? The recklessness of politicians. A deputy president standing up and saying this and that, basically curtailing the fundamental freedoms of other people, and also having an opposition leader saying this and that. Believe me, people will move their monies elsewhere.
Yeah.
They'll shift their monies
Capital
elsewhere.
is a coward.
It's a coward.
It's a coward.
It's a coward. And particularly remember, these monies are managed by people who trained at Harvard. You know those Ivy colleges, Ivy League, Brown, Harvard, MIT. If it's the UK, you know, it will be Cambridge, it will be Oxford, Said School of Government. So for them, they have boxes, boxes that they tick. Now, if they are missing, believe me, yeah, and it's you know, it's done automatically with these all apps. Once they see, they say, no, move your monies elsewhere. And if they detect that for every dollar they're going to lose out on so much, they want to be with you. They want to be with you. So these protests, if I were the persons in charge of issues in Kenya, I would get all these people to sit down in a room and chat away. We agree on things we can manage and things that are beyond our control. For instance, the international shipping that has been disrupted. First of all, we have a spillover, backlog from COVID lockdown.
Yep.
Then we have disrupted shipping because of the war in Ukraine. Then you have scarcity of US dollars. The scarcity of US dollars you are aware?
Yes,
in Kenya. Yeah. You remember the statement of President Suluhu when she said that there's a country, neighboring country that does not even have a wheat. I think Kenya's reserves are fallen below. There used to be on average 4.5 months, 4.5 months under Uhuru. You're saying now these fellows have been in charge for 3 months. I don't know how much their reserves are, but they've fallen. Their reserves have fallen. And I'm giving it again as the background of Uhuru having grown the economy from 69 billion US dollars to $108 billion in a span of only 6 years. 2016 to 2022, Kenya nearly doubled it.
Against very high debt.
Very high debt. And what was he financing? Infrastructure. You know, and we elites, persons in our space here, are drawn to trophy projects, what they call Potemkin village, projects that are meant to projects that are basically for what they call Masape. 800 million US dollars for expressway. If you had built a rail station, a rail line between Entebbe and where, it would cost even maybe a tenth of that or maybe. And the other money you inject in value addition projects, you earn much more in social impact. But if you go for trophy projects, like even in Ethiopia, you're going to land in the same problem there. High debt, but then, of course, now economic growth is suppressed. They are growing, but they are what? Suppressed. There's no uptake. Then 40% unemployment. Headline inflation is at 9.2, meaning that the cost of living is basically on basics, which is gas, petroleum, food, going high. Therefore, you're basically you're
back to the central.
You're creating a stage for
economic anarchy,
and anarchy, and conflict can escalate very easily. You remember in Taiwan, rather Tunisia. Mohamed Bouazizi is the guy who self-immolated. We had a golf tournament in Fort Porto, and golfing, you don't carry your phone on. So after playing golf, the 18th hole, we had a very long night, so I didn't have access to my phone on a Friday. By the time I regained my strength on Saturday evening, Tunisia had 3 different presidents in the space of 24 hours. So things can escalate beyond our imagination. So these Kenyans had better get more serious.
Right. Well, we are due for a short commercial break. Mr. Uhuru, allow me to begin with you after this short commercial break. Yeah, to the viewers, thank you for making a date with us this afternoon. Don't move a muscle. We shall be back very shortly.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media or to access and use computers, other electronic devices, and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Our viewers will be back from that short commercial break. Uhuru, the economic implication, not just within Kenya, but across the region, how does it look like so far? Are we headed for tough times, or it is just, a pocket case that can be ignored?
As Edgar said, I don't think we have enough evidence to establish the impact so far on the demonstrations in Kenya. Of course, we expect if they escalate, of course, there will be disruption of supply chains. And then, of course, that increases the cost of doing business in Uganda, and also ultimately the price of goods. But then for me, I would want to look at it in the context of the East African Federation. So our president always argues that why we need the East African Federation. I believe in it for different reasons than him. So he looks at it from the economic angle mainly, of course also from the perspective of security, which makes more sense to me than the economic, and then of course the political bit. So looking at for the economic side, so his argument is that we need a wider market. And of course, you know that if there is chaos in Kenya, even the economy is paralyzed. And so people who are exporting goods to Kenya, that means they are going to be affected. But then I went to two countries, Luxembourg and Singapore, and they changed my analysis of the economic integration bit. So the argument of the president is that our markets are small, and so if we federate, then we have wider market. And then so I looked at a country like Luxembourg. It has 650,000 people, the population of Mukono district. And then Singapore has 5 million people.
The purchasing power.
And then you look at Singapore, there is an Apple outlet in Singapore with 5 million people. There's no Apple outlet in Nigeria with over 300 million people. And so you ask yourself why. So the challenge we have is why is it important for me to export to Kenya? Because if I produce a product and then the middle class is small, and then that means I'm looking at a market in Uganda of say 1 million people. And then so if I want to attract a market of 10 million people, then I have to export. Because it actually makes more sense for me to sell locally because it's even cheaper, less complicated. But because the market is small, so I export. Now, when we get obsessed with a wider market, we fail at the microeconomics. How do we ensure that people have disposable income such that they can buy the produces that are being produced locally? And because we have a small middle class, that means the purchasing power is low.
Very low.
And so we have to go to Kenya. So why don't we get obsessed with actually ensuring that we have enough local market? How can we increase the purchasing power? Such that at the end of the day, even if I have 44 million people, I can sell and then make enough in terms of revenue, looking at it from a business perspective. And so you find that a company establishes base in Singapore with 5 million people, because each person in Singapore is going to buy, say, $50,000 in a year. And then in Uganda, a person will buy, say, $600. And so doing business in Uganda ceases to make sense for many companies. And so, yes, we need the market in Kenya. But then things like political instability, and especially it made more sense when I was looking at the war, at the sanctions on Russia. And then look, okay, if Russia had not built the local market, and then you have all these sanctions, then the economy would collapse. And so if you look at the response of the West towards the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then you look at all these instabilities and the impact they have on on the neighboring countries, then you start having to rethink how we understand the economics from going from the macro and coming back to the micro. And say, okay, how do we build local capacity? How do we enhance the capacity of our people such they can be able to consume? That's why supermarkets are collapsing in Uganda, because the middle class is small. And then for you are having 5 branches, 10 branches. Who is going to purchase from those supermarkets? So at the end of the day, they come here not because their business practices are poor. It's just because the market cannot accommodate 50 supermarkets. And so some will collapse. And these
unless you're talking of chain supermarkets.
Yeah, we're talking about, of course, supermarkets in the real meaning of the word.
We have our Friend, we have our Best Buy, which are really more like
shops,
bigger
grocery stores. Yeah, exactly. And so for me, yes, our people who are trading with Kenya are going to be affected if the chaos continues. But then that gives us an opportunity to actually rethink how we understand micro and macroeconomics. And so we can start planning better and say that, okay, the first priority is to grow the local market. And then such that people who are doing business can have enough market to sell. And then ultimately we start looking at the regional market and the international market. And so that's an opportunity for us to start thinking in that direction.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Amazing. Agnes, your own perspective regarding the economic implication of this.
You see, the issue of Kenya is finding us in a state of fragility. Like you said, right from COVID, unexplained situation that we are living in economically and socially in terms of prices of goods and services. And it is quite very unfortunate that we have not seen discussions at a higher level or within the sense like these two gentlemen are putting across. What we are seeing our people doing this morning, I was coming and I heard over the radio that police is doing military training in preparation to what is happening in Kenya. Those are the lines along which we are preparing ourselves.
What, the Republic of Uganda?
Yes.
It's doing training?
Yes, they are training.
Oh, they are doing refresher.
The military.
The military is doing training.
No, the police is doing military training. That's what I heard over the radio. And we have not had this kind of conversations like we are having here on how best do we organize ourselves socially and economically. I agree with my colleagues that we do not have empirical data in percentages and figures. But you see, because our economy is not regulated, our market has no governor. Traders have already started hiking the prices and giving the Kenya crisis as an excuse. I have been approached by farmers who are failing to plant this season because the price of seed, the price of fertilizer, I don't know, I don't even know, I've lost count of
the price of fertilizer, NPK is 235,000 shillings.
Yes.
It could have even gone higher.
Urea is around 300
2
something.
years ago, it used to be at 90,000.
Yes.
So you can imagine in terms of cost.
You can imagine.
Then for seed, many of the improved varieties, especially for the
Beans
food
and
crops,
maize.
beans and maize, are from Kenya.
Yes.
Kitale, Kenya Seed Company, and Mount Elgon Seed Company, which are all Kenyan companies.
They are Kenyan.
They are commercialized seed. We don't have commercialized seed production in Uganda. Maybe a bit of Victoria seeds, but even then
not
it's not really. So,
and you see,
as she's talking about regulation of the market and the market structure.
Last season, the farmers planted the bean seed at around 3,000 something. And now it is at 30,000. 30,000. And to plant an
for
acre.
the small holders.
Yes, even if not a small holder, for any farmer. Because in this country, there are not so many farmers, if there are any, who plant with a projection of how much they will sell their produce. You see, they are all baiting. And if a farmer is going to plant an acre, needs 30 kilograms. So 30 kilograms times 30,000. So by the
900,000.
yes,
Sometimes that garden can't bring us that much in terms
it's
of
not.
whatever. In terms
And
of
you know, we may not be seeing the implications now, but we are going to see them in the future. And one of the farmers told me, you see, people are complaining that the food prices are high. The worst is yet to come because we are not going to be able to plant. And when we go to the seed dealers, they're telling us because of the crisis that is in Kenya, that's why the prices of seed have gone up. And it is raining, and there is no discussion among our leaders to even address that basic. So for me, it is quite...
Which leaders?
We have leaders.
The ones who take Mabati?
Those
You
ones.
expect anybody from what is happening? Well, you have my very best wishes to
Edgar.
have expectations from that crowd.
So this is going to affect, you know, the moment you affect the agriculture sector, which is the biggest production sector in the economy, it means that the whole economy is going to suffer. But we are very good at not correlating things. We are very good at that. So when eventually we get there, we shall have forgotten about what happened in Kenya, and all what we did is to do military training for police, as opposed to looking for economic.
There's another economic benefit we can get. You know very well,
Yes.
as I do, that every year Kenya is at the verge of 10 million people at the verge of starvation.
Yes.
And the rains have not been so good for Kenya, most parts of Kenya.
But also, you know that we cannot feed them by our chaff maize.
Why? What is that thing?
Aflatoxin. Yeah, they go and import from elsewhere.
No, but those are cartels within Kenya that prefer, and some of those names we have been mentioning are involved in those. One of them was actually removed from office when he was Minister for Agriculture under Kibaki for playing around the maize. So Uganda actually could benefit by exporting
if we had prepared
if we are prepared
ourselves. But we are not.
Unfortunately, the Uganda grain mill. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, it's
I have
fine.
this bad habit.
It's okay.
The Uganda Grain Council
Yeah.
does not have the resources to, and we are not that very organized. And you know very well, what do they call it? Extension agriculture.
Yes, agriculture
extension, inputs, then the supply and distribution chain, then finance in Uganda are not anchored. So everybody is doing their own stuff, and we think somehow miracles will happen. So the Kenya will have drought, they'll import maize from Brazil, from Argentina.
Why
it goes next door.
why our maize is not even good for a fertilizer?
And yet we have a technology that has been produced, whatever has been outed by National Agricultural Research Organization to address aflatoxins. So we can have seeds that are resistant. But unfortunately,
we opened up our seed system.
And
you know, we left it there. And so many people, by the way, even what we call some seed companies, are actually packing grain as seed.
Ordinary grain.
You know, ordinary grain.
So it can't sprout the...
It can't. It can't. So that's why I was talking about the issues of radiation. And these are the things that the Wananchi want in a democracy. These are the things that the Wananchi want or desire to see in any form of leadership. And for me, it is quite sad, but it's unfortunate that we have to rise up against our leaders and, you know, the target to bite off their nose and ears for them to remember what they are supposed to do. When we are still living with extreme inequality, there is a lot of inequality in Kenya. You see these flyovers taking the rich below.
You should see the cars.
Yeah.
No, when you're an Uber, the Uber driver says, "Can we go up there so that they charge more, or do you use this ordinary whatever and you delay? You're going to catch a plane." But my friend, when you go in the expressways, the cars that drive there, the Range Rover, GX is below.
And below the slums,
you see the cars.
The inequality, the corruption, you know, the deprivation among these people. For me, I want to get off this segment by saying we shouldn't look for the reasons behind or the people behind these people. If we assume leadership, let us do what we want to do, what we are supposed to do, give people the services, create an enabling environment, and people thrive on their own. and then you will rule in peace.
And this will fall from the sky?
No, we have to do
It
it.
takes,
You and who?
With the
people-
people.
With the
must
people.
be
How will
involved.
that be done if we are comfortably seated in our seats?
And
not taking-
condemning them.
And to bring back Uhuru as we wrap up this particular discussion. Uhuru, Kenya as a country has an international criminal court case that of course was as a result of the electoral violence in 2007. Do you think that the restraint that we are seeing, for example, from the security forces in Kenya is partly as a result of they appreciate that there is an ICC hammer hanging just above their shoulders, and therefore should they risk and tip the country into another turmoil, then they could be headed back to The Hague. So I don't know, how do you evaluate their restraint? Because when you look at the way the police is responding, the way even the government is responding, there is so much restraint. They are not full blown. So what are some of those
What
factors?
were you expecting?
What do you expect them to do? How do you expect them to behave?
My question is, what are some of these factors? Do you think that they learned from their experience?
Kenyan
in
police
2007?
used to be extremely brutal under Moi.
Yes,
Extremely brutal.
exactly my point. So I'm comparing them with
With the Moi.
yes. So I don't know. Is it
I don't think it's an issue with ICC.
Mm.
No, I don't think so. I think President Ruto is safe as long as he is in good books with the controllers of international capital. And I think so far he's doing well. You just saw JP Morgan launching in Kenya. So I think he's in good books with the lords of international capital. And if that's the case, then I think ICC is not an issue. Their behavior, I don't think they would. I don't expect them to be brutal because it's not a regime police. They kind of have a national character, and so it's not even if it's not it's not the case with some neighboring country that I may not mention. So I expect what I'm saying.
You mean Somalia?
So it's not a regime. It's not a regime police that has to do everything possible to ensure the survival of the regime. And so it also appreciates that this regime is also going to go. And for us, we shall remain as the police. So when you are handling people, you must also look at continuity. Because
even the IGP, his tenure of office is very clear and can't serve beyond certain whatever.
Exactly. So it's not pleasing anyone.
And he's appointed through a rigorous process that involves the public.
Yeah, so it's not that he has to please some master somewhere to ensure that he serves for a longer tenure. So definitely, what we are seeing is something that we would expect, especially appreciating such dynamics that the IGP is not someone appointed by someone. He has to ensure that that person stays in power, and especially that the police knows that even after this regime, there is another regime we are going to serve. So we expect it. It's not.
So
I don't
we
think
can
it's
say that they have a trans-regime security apparatus. Edgar
yes.
Tabaro, you look at Kenya on 3 instances. One is that Kenya voted against Russia's invasion in Ukraine. That is one. The Supreme Court of Kenya not long
Ukraine
ago.
has given them 25 million metric tons of wheat.
Yes, but
It has made a donation.
to Kenya. But my point is that
Do you
Russia.
think that's what informs their?
Well, I don't know.
policy?
Well, I mean, they voted
Wheat.
against the wheat is very critical to Kenya's.
But I don't think it would inform their foreign policy decision.
I am just trying to frame my question to Edgar.
Appreciation.
Edgar, is that you look at Kenya voted in favor of, voted against Russia's attack on Ukraine. Kenya of recent, their Supreme Court did their ruling regarding anti-homosexuality and all this LGBTQ thing was that they sort of took a liberal approach that, they're free to associate. So the question is that, I don't know, do you think that the Kenyan government is sort of more leaning towards the liberal democracy, and that is why even under such circumstances, they would not maybe take a rigorous approach or maybe a violent approach because they are leaning more towards the Western democracy.
A rigorous approach towards what?
For example, you look at the way, still again, the way the government has responded towards this demonstrations. They have used the least amount of violence possible. And perhaps because they appreciate that people in a democracy must have freedom of expression and things like that. So is that Kenya showing that they are leaning more towards the liberal democracy?
At the beginning, I told you that Kenya is I mean, you introduced it and said it was you called it a scion or the bastion of democracy in the region. Although you had said Africa, well, arguably. But I qualified it by saying it's a fledgling democracy, it's a nascent democracy. It's still developing. It's not yet mature. It's beyond the embryonic stage, I could say. They've already given birth. And maybe the child is trying to walk but still crawling. You know, when you're crawling, for those of us who are fathers, Mr. Kidega, when a child is crawling, when a child is crawling and attempts to stand up and walk, it's about to what? No, fall, trip over and fall. I think that's compared to its. I wouldn't even want to use the word peers. Compared to its neighbors, I think the neighbors are still at embryonic stage. And Kenya is at that stage where the child is beginning to walk, but also tripping over and falling back. And these are the things you expected. These are the things you expect. And we've seen it in Senegal, same thing. Senegal made big strides. It was one of the first countries to democratize, and an incumbent handing over power to losing power. There was this tall guy, Diop, Abdou Diop, handing over to Abdoulaye Wade. And also what they also lost, handing over and created a precedent. Same thing also happened in Benin. But Kenya had moved much ahead of these. Why? Because it has a more vibrant civil society. It's democratic. The ethos and the path towards democratization were spearheaded by the elite, persons in industry, persons in academia, captains of industry, industrialists, leading academics, leading what I said, crusaders for say environment like Wangari Maathai, and they took in a lot. They took risks. In Uganda, we like to liken risks, sacrifice to risks. When people go to the bush, they say they sacrificed, but me, it's more like taking risks. They took risks. And what you have in Kenya is a result of what I said, deliberate and intentional. So to address your issue of liberalism, Kenya's constitution mirrors much what is in Uganda. We have we take a liberal approach towards fundamental human rights. That Kenyan constitution, you see, it had many Ugandan experts on it, including Professor Edgar Frederick Sempebo, one of the foremost constitutional law experts in Uganda. So it mirrored that approach, a liberal democracy, and this whole gay rights movement. And for Kenya, the judiciary there, it's not like ours. Our judiciary here is a little bit, I don't know what word I would use without sounding politically incorrect. It's not as vibrant. It's not as activist. You know what? There's what they call judicial activism. Now in Kenya, I mean, the CJ, they have their background in civil society. Former president of the Supreme Court, William Mutunga, also background in. So and what we are seeing, the precedents, the jurisprudence that is emerging on that place reflects, again, which was a deliberate attempt by them, because they widened the net for recruiting into the judiciary. That you even have a judge, a person emerging as Chief Justice who has no background as a what? As a judge, as a sitting judge. Person coming from civil society, catapulted to the what? Position of CJ. But through a rigorous public what? Process. Not rewarding cronies or political what? Or what would the word? Political failures, or again, I don't want to be very politically incorrect. Well, that would be even more incorrect, politically incorrect if I reduced it to cadres. But you get what I mean. However, on the issue of the police, Kenyan police has a history of brutality. under Moi, they were extremely brutal. Extreme
Because
brutal
it was
in the
a
extreme.
regime police.
It was a regime police.
Yes.
Now there's been an attempt to nationalize the character, to reflect the national character of Kenya. However, I must warn that security forces the world over, when they are subjected to long periods of stress,
They are human.
exactly, they react and go in a very similar manner. Be it in the US, you see what is happening in France. Be it in France, you've seen Australian soldiers in Iraq shooting at unarmed civilians. When the world, when they are subjected to long periods of stress and uncertainty, they are all bound to react in the same way, brutality. So
Enough is enough.
really, in Kenya, it could very easily escalate to that.
So
level.
they should stay warned. I mean, those who are,
But then I wanted also to
moving the
comment on your
protests.
question on Kenya's position on the war in Ukraine. I don't think that's an indication of a country being democratic. That I don't think the war in Ukraine is about democracy versus authoritarianism. I really don't take that position.
Yeah.
Because I don't think pre-war Ukraine was really democratic. It was corrupt. It had all sorts of weaknesses that you can find in all African countries.
Cronyism.
Yeah, so it wasn't it's only that, of course, right now it's presented as a war between democracy and authoritarianism, with the Ukraine preserving the values of democracy, and so it's a mobilization tool to mobilize international
But remember,
support.
Ukraine is the birthplace of the Orange movement. You remember who was that guy who had refused to hand over power, and the street demonstrations. You remember what was it?
Because of complicated names, that's sort of.
They all have cove what.
But now, I want us to shift, and rightly so, is that the aspect of what is in Africa, that we are seeing so many what you'd call global powers. We have seen the Russian president, trying to meet and invite African leaders.
He's coming to Africa in August for BRICS, South Africa.
Yes, exactly. We have seen the vice president of the USA, meeting, several African leaders. I don't know, China also is trying to make headway.
France.
So
Macron was in the Pope.
Gambia? Was it?
No, he was in DRC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was in
South Sudan?
No, that was the Pope.
Yes, it was
but
the Pope.
Macron did his rounds as well. So, in fact, he was pictured in Kinshasa at a local kafunda with the local populace.
Yes. So Agnes, I have to begin with you. What is there that these people are looking for in Africa that has not been there before?
What is left in the world elsewhere to be grabbed? All what is left.
Is it still a strong?
All what is left to be grabbed in the world is in Africa.
Like?
Where are the weakest institutions of governance in the world?
That is my opinion.
The weakest institutions of governance are left with that.
That's my opinion. Is that all these that are calling us to meet and those that are visiting us, it is not that they love us so much. It is because the only girl remaining in the village to be coached is Africa. It is about our resources. It has less to do with our people. We shouldn't be fooled that these people are coming because of our hunger, that they are coming because of our disease, that they are coming because of our poverty. Actually, all those work in their favor. Everybody needs Africa's natural resource. Everybody needs to prepare Africa as a market, just like earlier we talked about. Because we are being trapped into consumers of policy, consumers of goods and services, consumers of narratives, consumers of everything. So for me, that's how I look at it. Everybody wants our natural resources because they will be required anyway. Everybody wants our land. Everybody wants all what we have except ourselves. And that is how I can simply put it. And whoever grabs this girl and ties a knot of nkusibida of some kind, They call it engagement. Yes, yes, does an engagement of some kind is more secure going into the future. Because even this little money, after raping us and they throw it to us, it works in their favor. It works in their favor. That's why the money comes here and it only 20% that reaches here, and the 80% makes a U-turn back. So for me, how I wish all African people would look at things the way I look at them in that context, then we would be better negotiators. We would be better, we would position ourselves better to negotiate with all these men who are left with no other wife to marry except me alone, like I'm on this show. Okay? And then I become a better negotiator. The unfortunate bit is that our leaders, either they were trapped into a tin that they find it very difficult to get out. But you would see that if it wasn't that, everybody is coming with interests. Everybody is coming with interests. So the challenge we are having is again making a decision amid so many suitors. Chances are high that you're going to land on a wrong character.
Okay, Uhuru, is Africa becoming a swing continent? How you see the swing states that are the decider? That, you know, amidst the competition between China, USA, Russia, is that there is a swing continent somewhere that could, if they swung in your favor, then perhaps you stand a better chance at, you know, portraying yourself as a global hegemon. I don't know, how do you perceive all these Africa summits and all these things?
First, I would want to state it clear that all nations pursue selfish interests in the international system. And you know, if you appreciate that, then you as an African leader or an African country, then you'd also know that you must also pursue your selfish interests in the international system. And so you see, as Africans, we like crying a lot. Oh, the world is unfair. They have come for our resources. All countries are pursuing selfish interests. So when you see a Russian president coming to African continent, or foreign affairs minister, or Chinese president, they are pursuing the interests of their countries. And for me, that's okay. That's what they are supposed to do. If you are a president of America, your first obligation is to pursue the interests of American people. If you're an African leader, your first obligation is to pursue the interest of your country.
If you have them.
And so, if for you, you have not stated your interests clear, then for me, when I come, I will pursue mine.
Put them on the table.
And you see, when you get to appreciate that, then many things start making sense. So, I wouldn't say that Africa is the swing state in the context of American elections, that whoever gets America then definitely becomes the next superpower or global power. But of course, Africa is significant, even when many scholars try to downplay its significance. You read a book on foreign relations, international relations, and you don't see Africa appearing anywhere. You can say, read Fukuyama's book, The End of History, and the Last Man, and you can barely see Africa mentioned anywhere. You open any book, significant book on international relations. So they try to downplay the significance of Africa. Of course, that works in their interest. It's a strategy. But of course, I don't say that it's a swing state that whoever gets it becomes the next global leader or the next superpower, but it's very significant. One, it's an emerging market. It's an emerging market. It has come of age. So if you are preparing your economy for the next 20 years, definitely you can't avoid thinking about your African strategy. Then two, it has of course natural resources that the world needs, mineral resources, oil, and all these resources available. And of course, there are some resources which you can only find in Africa if you want significant quantities. And so your African policy must be in line with that to ensure that you have access to those resources. And then also, it's also strategically located. And so if you are America, or if you are Russia, or you are China, and then you are you are designing your security policy, and then definitely you need Africa. So they are coming here because Africa is significant in global politics. So in terms of resources, in the fact that it's an emerging economy, the market is emerging. So you're talking about 2.5 billion people by 2050. And so that's a huge market. And if you only have 50% of those in the middle class, you're talking about a middle class of over 1.2 billion people. And so if you can have influence over that market, definitely the interests of your country are in line. So that's how I think these emerging powers look at the African continent. So if China is fighting, and of course for the Western world there is the threat of China, because China is gaining significant influence over the continent. The Western world, they are no longer as rich as they used to be, that they can splash dollars all over the continent as they used to do. And so countries are running to China for loans. And of course the loans come with influence. And so that becomes a threat to the Western world. So they have also to come up with a counter. And so all of these summits and then the discussions around democracy and all that is, of course, to counter the influence of China, the influence of India, the influence of Russia. So for me, that's how I look at it in that angle. And for us, as Africans, we have to appreciate that these countries have interests. That's natural. You should also have interests. So when you are negotiating, as my sister was saying, you must have your interests well stated. So you must, we are going to negotiate, and this is the position from which I'm negotiating. These are my interests. These are the interests of the other party. How can we strike a balance? How can I outcompete the other person when it comes to negotiations? And now for us, what we do, because we don't go with the clear interest stated, what we end up doing is to negotiate our personal interests. And so you find that, okay, you see when for me I'm negotiating the interests of America, and for you, you're negotiating the interests of your family, then it becomes very easy for me to get what I want, because your interests can easily be met. But the interests of Uganda may not easily be met as the interests of the person who is going to represent Uganda. And so that's where we lose it. So the person comes with his interests, so you are seated in front of Henry Kissinger, and then he has studied foreign policy, international relations for how diplomacy has emerged for the last 500 years. So he knows what card to use in which circumstances, and at the end of the day to get his interests. Now for you, you have no interests. They have given you the position of Uganda, but at the end of the day, what you put forward are your personal interests. So it becomes very easy for me to get what I want out of the negotiations.
Yeah. Wow, very, very enthusiastic.
And
I just had to bring in Edgar.
Before, I'm sorry for coming back. And it is quite very interesting that in these circumstances, all these people that are visiting us have scripts. They have already written scripts on negotiating negotiating text.
Trade deals.
Yes, text. They have the deals are very clear. You either get this or you get this. If you don't get this, you get the other. But for us, we wait for those scripts to discuss the scripts that the other party has already come with. And I just wanted to add that what he was saying.
Yeah.
And it makes your negotiations very, very fragile.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if I go to my per diem and I go to the next mall, I think it is better.
Yes, Council, does Africa have interests? And if so, what are those interests on the global stage?
I'll start with the Republic of Uganda. Even us, with the so-called elite, or may I say intelligentsia, if I asked you what is Uganda's state doctrine, can anybody ably articulate it? What is Uganda's state doctrine? So if you don't have a state doctrine is the standards, a direction that determines your relations with other countries. And your operation and strategy is supposed to follow the doctrine. I'll ask that of many African elite. They're so withdrawn from it. Even, I dare say, persons in government, ask them what is the state doctrine. Tebabimanyi, Angas. We are ignorant of that. Now, if
We have ideology.
what is the ideology? What is the ideology? That's the thing. And, when you listen to the speeches of some of the foremost African nationalists, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, you could even talk of the Joe Slovos of this world, Steve Biko, Samora Machel, Mondlane, Agustino Neto. I mean, there are peripheral of them. You come across examples here and there. Lumumba, Louis Rwagasore of Burundi. Mwalimu Nyerere, I mean, his Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Nasser Gama Nasser of Egypt. Rwanda had King Rudahigwa, although he didn't live long, and for him he had acquired his outlook towards a liberal constitutional monarch from Buganda. And you look at the terrain of the emerging African leadership. The leadership in place and the one that is emerging, you really weep. I mean, which persons do we have who are at that category? Contemporaneously, or those who are emerging? Are there persons? So we have one weak governance structures. Two, I don't know, I don't want to use adjectives on this show, but the persons who have self-doubt, the most able of persons who would have taken the mantle and the challenges we have in leadership are the ones in self-doubt. Now, the least competent, the biggest mediocres have, I don't know where they get the confidence from.
They can dare.
I don't know where they get the confidence from. So we have a terrible mismatch, a terrible disjuncture. And we are rich with the resources. We have a fast-growing population. Africa is the next frontier for doing business. Even Russia, which was laid back, you can see is now pushing back and coming to Africa. Russia, Turkey, India, China. And we are going to see even emerging powers like Brazil coming to take foothold in Africa. That does not mean to say that all is couched in gloom and gloom and what did you call it? And hopelessness. No. I'm only challenging ourselves. And in the face of American and this growing interest in the region, first, let me give you a little bit of a background. If you look at the economic terrain in Africa, from Dakar to Maputo, believe me, France has taken its foothold. From Dakar to Maputo.
In Mozambique.
Yes, Mozambique. The gas finds, the oil finds in the countries that fall within that confluence are coming firmly under French control. Now, France and the United Kingdom signed an agreement. Remember the Fashoda crisis? Where French West Africa, the French were expanding from West Africa and wanted to control thrusters of land up to the Indian Ocean. Now, Britain had gained control and established a colony where? In Kenya. As a result, they took interest in what? In Uganda. And remember those social religious wars between the Wafalansa and the Wangeleza? They have a background in that history that I'm going to, I hope I articulate it. I'm not a great historian, but I take lessons from history. Unlike many of our contemporary leaders, they study history for purposes of cramming and exams and scoring A's, and they run away from the responsibilities that lessons of history teach us. But because of the Nile, having taken control of the source of the Nile, they needed to control all the way up to Egypt because Britain had invested so much in the Suez Canal. So they needed to protect it for purposes, one, economic and military. But the French had reached Fashoda, present day, what would be the place? Just around Juba. Wow. and they clashed, and there was an imminent war between French and the British. And they sat down and said, look here, we don't have to go all that way. Let us define our interests in Africa. So they entered what they call an entente cordiale. Entente cordiale said that they agreed that Britain would never harm another's interest in what? In Africa. And they agreed on how to delimit French influence in West Africa and British influence where? In the East. So the Entente Cordiale redefined the state policy of France to the extent that they made a decision to make their dominions in in Africa not just French colonies, but assimilated entities and an extension of the French Republic. And that's why you see all these, a very large, whatever presence of immigrants, especially from North Africa, Algeria, Tunisia, and a bit of the Sahel. That is a result of that. And remember, before French West Africa were provinces, and they had representatives, deputies in their national assembly. I'm going into this because it defines what is happening right now. Now, fast forward during the clamor for democracy in the 90s and the fall of the Habyarimana government in Rwanda, the British took it as an affront. Rather, the French took it as an affront on their interests. And they went back on the drawing table to strategize. All these formations you see, Uganda and DRC have a joint treaty for exploration of minerals, of the oil. When was it drafted? It was between Mobutu and Museveni. Who pushed for it? It was François Mitterrand. François Mitterrand, his son Christophe, was the French advisor on African affairs and happened to be a personal friend of a certain late John Kazora, who was a presidential advisor and a relation to the First Family. I'm emphasizing these things to show you what extent those people go to define their interests and deepen them and pursue them. Contemporaneously in Uganda, President Museveni, who has a rich background in the liberation struggles, even having published an essay edited by Professor Shamireria, his professor at Dar es Salaam, University of Dar es Salaam, that was heavily influenced by Frantz Fanon, but tilted towards violence, political violence. And that is what has informed his modus operandi. He sees everything in terms of what? Violence. So even integrating East Africa is doing it militarily. We are not economically strong yet. Even socially, we are not that strong. And Museveni articulates it very ably. Says the reason why Africa was easily colonized is that we are not socially organized. Now he's making the same mistake that Joseph Stalin made of the USSR. One of the main reasons why the USSR collapsed, it was not economically and socially strong, although it was militarily strong. And this is what we are building again in Uganda. Museveni has done many commendable things in that space of integrating, to the extent that, he's got buy-in. I remember leaders in the region, save for the one immediate south, many of the leaders in the region have changed, but he has continued to get buy-in from them. The hardest state to convince to integrate was Tanzania. But the moment he brought this Jacob, you see, was supposed to go through Kenya. It was a concluded deal. The Uhurus were in shock when we got Magufuli on board to sign to a Jacob. Now, I'm emphasizing the aspects of the economy. Museveni had gotten it right. But of late, I don't know whether it's because age has caught up with him and he can't continue buying a lot of time. But you see now he's now fast tracking the military. He's deepening more of the military than economy. I don't know whether he's also resigned like I am on, on our economy ever, you know, because we talked about maize. A commodity, you don't need so much of it's not rocket science to get these things done. They've been done elsewhere. We could actually just copy and paste, but deploy the right people. You don't, for God's sake, you don't get Count Dracula, to go and guard the blood bank. You don't get mbuzi, goats, to guard your Malagar.
In 2 minutes.
So and the Americans, these imperial powers, have their defined interests. And believe me, we are going to find ourselves where we were at independence. Because one, we are not organized. Two, poor governance, the leadership that is emerging, and the likes of Museveni, who could have easily organized what they call the center of gravity in Africa. But he had established the capacity from the eastern coast to the western coast. He has his troops all over. He's in a way a big chief. He's in a way big chief. But unfortunately, the anchoring in the nation is totally absent. So there's a disjuncture between what President Museveni is doing, his government, and we, the citizenry, and particularly us, the elite. We are pulling in different directions.
So that means that Africa is literally very gullible to whatever.
It's susceptible
comes.
it's susceptible to whatever.
Yeah.
To
Well,
the challenges. That
our time is fast spent, but I'll give you each just 30 seconds to say goodbye and perhaps give us your last words on the show. And I'll begin with you, Agnes, then Uhuru, then I'll conclude with Edgar.
Okay, my parting shots there today is that we desire to live in a democracy, and a democracy that serves the needs of the people. That's what the people want. We desire to live in a democracy where the democratic leaders really serve the word and its meaning. To say that we narrow the gap, the inequality gap, we deliver the services to create an enabling environment for every person to be he who or she is. Less that, we shall keep to the textbook definition of democracy, but in any case, there will come a time when the people will say, enough is enough, especially if we have pressed hard their nose, they can't breathe. They cannot lose that last breath without giving a pushback. It's your duty and it is your responsibility.
Yes, Uhuru.
Yes, first of all, I would differ from my brother Edgar. I think there is still hope. I'm optimistic. The situation of Africa is it's terrible, but I think there is some hope. And I think we still have an opportunity to redefine even what democracy means, because I think it means different things to different groups of people. And I think we still have an opportunity to redefine what it means, and then what ideal society would want to create, and what that society would look like against all influences that are presenting to us a homogeneous way of looking at things. I think we still have that opportunity, looking at the socio-economic forces of development, looking at what are the aspirations of our people, and then be able to look at all that, and also the dynamics, the internal dynamics within the African nation, to be able to create a kind of system that can guarantee continuity, because that's very key, and also security. And I think that answer may partly be in the East African Federation as a center of gravity, which of course, the center of gravity, yes, the president has promoted it, but I think for me, my inspiration from that is for Marcus Garvey. He wrote a very nice pamphlet, Opinions and Philosophies of Marcus Garvey, where he outlined that vision of an African nation that will act as the center of gravity to protect the interests of African people wherever they are on earth. So the answer may be there, but still we also have an opportunity to also think, in case that experiment fails, what is the alternative? So I still believe we have not come to the end of thinking in Africa. So we can still reimagine the future and say, okay, if the dream of the Nkurumas and the Marcus Garveys of the United States of Africa, of course, that may not be attainable, but of the East African Federation, then what if it doesn't work out? What is the alternative? So we still have an opportunity to reimagine and be able to create all these possibilities.
Well, thank you. Edgar, you have the last words on the show.
You know, three critical things. One, democratization is a process. It's not an event. You set out to deepen it. You're about to meet challenges. You're about to hit what they call false starts. On the journey of democratization, you're bound to find, you know, potholes like our roads in Kampala. When you are driving and you come upon a pothole, what do? You either dodge it or slow down, you know, you through it. Yeah. Then you come across a hill, you engage the right gear to go over the hill, then you to the top, you realize, you know, you have to go down the valley, then, you know, you respond in accordance with the challenges. But, and I must also warn, democracy is not a perfect system, but it's the least imperfect thus far. I mean, all the other systems that have been tested, we've seen. I lived in South Africa, schooled and lived there. I saw a country that had been torn apart by racial divisions, by ethnic divisions, they still have social inequalities, but really, you know, the Bantustan state and the other colonies, the so-called Cape Colony, Transvaal, Durban, Transvaal and Natal, were much more economically developed than the others. But we've seen what democracy has delivered there. Factitious, but, you know, institutions, the rule of law, the rule of institutions over individual whims of leaders. Lastly, not to dampen the moods of people. I'm not in any way saying that we are totally hopeless. Far from it. I'm only drawing to our attention that, look here, this is the challenge at hand. If we must confront it, if we must take the bull by the horns, we've got to do certain things. The things we desire, the society we intend to create, shall not and will never fall from the sky. We've got to work deliberately, intentional, and purposefully towards it. Very lastly, pre-independence, pre-colonial East Africa was integrated. And different races. We had Arabs, we had mixed race, Arabs and Africans are for Arabs. We had Indians, we had Portuguese, we had the British, who had even established a consulate in 1872, Gerard Porto, in where was it? In Zanzibar. Sir Samuel Baker was the British consul to the Turco-Egyptian Empire, the one that was extending to the rest of East Africa. So we had the Turkish, you remember Emin Pasha? Emin Pasha was Turkish.
Yeah.
Then, by the way, Portugal and Congo Kingdom, the one that covers what they call the present-day Congo province in Congo Kinshasa, had exchanged envoys, ambassadors at ambassadorial level with Portugal as early as 1541. 1541, Fort Jesus. Some of the words that we use presently are Portuguese words, mesa, pipa. So they were integrated, and these people were trading. You remember the trade caravans coming all the way from Pwani, the coast, through the Miombo Woodlands, to Bunyoro, to the Congo forest, to the savannas in South Sudan, to the Horn of Africa. They were trading. No roads, diverse religions, diverse languages, but they were integrated. So why can't you and I do it in the present day? That is the challenge I'm throwing to people.
I think that's the question that brings this show to its logical conclusion. Thank you very much, Council Edgar Tabaro, Mr. Uhuru. Thank you very much for being here. And of course, Agnes, thank you for spending the time to be here. To the viewers, it's always a pleasure having you every single Friday afternoon. We hope that this show, sheds a light on a couple of things that you're grappling to understand. But above all, just do right in whatever you do. Whether you are a duty bearer or you are a citizen, you all have obligations. Just do right. But above all, thank you for watching this show. See you next week, same time, same place. Bye-bye.